Why are you wearing that uniform?
Your family destroyed my career.
Who did this to you?
Rebecca. She framed me while you were gone.
Your device created the forged evidence.
You cannot prove I touched anything. The access logs already proved it. I thought that cart became my future.
I should have been here.
I needed you to believe me.
Now everyone will know the truth.
The Callaway private jet touched down at Midway at 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday in October, and Ethan Callaway sat in the leather seat a full 2 minutes after the engines cut before he stood up. 8 months away. 8 months of encrypted calls and 14-hour days in Singapore and Tokyo of signed NDAs and cold hotel rooms and missing Claire's voice in the particular way you miss something you've taught yourself not to think about. He hadn't told her he was coming home early. He wanted to see her face the moment she realized he was standing in front of her. But when he walked into the lobby of the Harrington Grand an hour later and stopped cold, the face he found was already looking down, and Claire Weston was pushing a hotel cleaning cart past the elevator bay. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 8 months away. He had not considered not once what those 8 months had cost her. Ethan had kept the suite reservation since September. He'd booked it from a serviced apartment in Singapore on the night the acquisition terms finally closed. When the relief hit him so hard, he'd sat on the bathroom floor for 10 minutes before he was steady enough to stand. He'd opened the Harrington's app and put in his card details and reserved the same suite where he'd proposed to Claire 18 months ago, the corner room on the 23rd floor, with the view of the lake that made the city look like something worth coming back to. He'd planned the wine thought about what he'd say, imagined the specific way her eyes would go when she saw him standing there in the lobby instead of on a screen. He had not imagined this. She was maybe 40 feet away, her back mostly to him, the cart moving steadily toward the service elevator. She wore the hotel's gray and white housekeeping uniform, the kind with the small embroidered crest on the breast pocket, and her hair was tied back, and something about the angle of her shoulders, the way she held herself even in that uniform, made him absolutely certain it was her before she turned around. He said her name, just once. Claire. She stopped. For a moment she didn't turn. The cart was still, and she was still, and the lobby noise, the soft piano from the bar, the rolling luggage, the murmur of a family checking in near the front desk continued around them like water moving past two rocks. Then she turned. Her face did something when she saw him that he would think about for a long time afterward. It was not the surprise he'd imagined. It was something more complicated than that, relief and shame and exhaustion all at once moving through her expression in the span of 2 seconds before she got control of it and put something more neutral in its place. Ethan. Her voice was steady. That was the thing that undid him, how steady her voice was. Like she'd been preparing for this. He crossed the lobby toward her. She took a half step back without seeming to realize it. He started. You weren't supposed to be here yet, she said. Not a question. Not quite an apology. Just a statement of timing. He stopped 2 feet away from her. He looked at the uniform, the cart, the small key card on a lanyard around her wrist with the hotel's logo on it. He'd stayed at this hotel a dozen times. He knew what that key card was for, Claire. His voice came out quieter than he intended. I need to finish my shift, she said. She looked at the cart, then back at him. I have 4 more rooms. If I don't finish, I lose today's wages. She said it plainly without self-pity, which was somehow the worst version of it. He reached out and put his hand over hers on the cart handle. She went still. How long, he said. She was quiet for a moment. The lobby moved around them. 4 months, she said. He released a slow breath. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and found the room card the front desk had given him when he checked in 15 minutes ago, before he'd seen her, when he was still carrying the version of tonight he'd planned. He placed it on top of the cart. "Room 2301, he said. "When your shift is done. I'll be there." She looked at the card. Something moved across her face and disappeared. "You should know it's not," she started. "I know," he said. "Whatever it is, I know it's not simple, and I'm not going anywhere." He held her gaze until she nodded, barely just a small movement of her chin. Then he picked up his carry-on from where he'd set it on the marble floor and walked toward the elevator. He did not look back. He already knew what he'd see if he did. Claire standing in the lobby of the hotel where he'd proposed to her in a housekeeping uniform, watching him go. And he wasn't ready to carry that image in his chest yet. Not tonight, not before he understood what had happened. In the elevator, he pressed the button for 23. The doors closed. He stood there and thought, 8 months. She had been here for 4 of them. That meant something had happened 4 months ago, and something had happened before that. He turned over the things she hadn't said, had not offered, had not led with, had not even gestured toward. And the shape of it was already clear enough to make his hands tighten around his bag. She hadn't called him. In 8 months, through whatever had brought her from a VP's office to a hotel uniform, she had not called him once. He thought about the room he was going up to, the suite with the lake view, the wine he'd have sent up, the speech he'd had already. He thought about what that room was supposed to represent. Then the elevator opened onto the 23rd floor, and he walked down the hall and unlocked the door, and he sat down on the edge of the bed in the dark and waited. He waited until 8 to 12 p.m., when he heard the key card in the door. She had changed out of the uniform. She was wearing her own clothes, jeans, and a dark jacket. He recognized the one she'd worn to a dinner in the West Loop 2 years ago. He'd never thought about how much he associated that jacket with a specific version of her. He noticed that she'd had it with her at the hotel, which meant she changed here, which meant this was a regular part of her day. He stood up when she came in. He didn't say anything. She looked around the suite, the view, the table he'd had sent up the wine, and something passed across her face that might have been grief, or might have been something harder to name. "You planned this," she said. "Since September." She set her bag on the chair near the door and stood there for a moment, not quite in the room yet. "I don't know where to start," she said. "Start anywhere," he said. "Or start at the beginning. I have all night." She came and sat down at the table. He poured a glass of water first, then wine, and she took the water. He sat across from her. "The lawsuit," she said. "That's where it started. Or that's where it became something I couldn't manage on my own." He said nothing. He had learned in 8 months of negotiations when to be quiet. She told him slowly. A civil lawsuit filed in February, 4 months after he'd left for Singapore, claiming that Claire Weston, formerly VP of Marketing at Fenwick Group, had misappropriated proprietary analytics software belonging to Callaway Ventures and transferred it to Fenwick for competitive use. The lawsuit had been filed by a firm she didn't recognize. The notice came to Fenwick's HR department the same day it was filed. By the end of that week, she no longer had a job. They had to act, she said. She wasn't defending them. She was explaining. The allegation named Fenwick as a secondary beneficiary. They couldn't keep me on while it was pending. "Who filed the suit?" Ethan said. "Harmon Wick and Reyes. They're based downtown." He didn't recognize the name. He kept his expression still. "I tried to access our joint account to cover the legal retainer," she said. "The bank flagged it. Someone had filed a report claiming suspicious activity on the account. I couldn't access it. And my personal savings, I'd been putting most of it into the house fund we'd talked about." There wasn't much left after legal fees for the initial response. He put down his glass. You couldn't access the joint account, he said. No. She was careful, measured. I tried 3 times. The flag had to go through an investigation. That took 6 weeks. By the time it cleared, the lease on the River North apartment had lapsed, and I'd already moved. She paused. I didn't want to renew anyway. It felt like she stopped. Like what? Like I wasn't sure what I was holding space for, she said quietly. That landed somewhere under his sternum. He didn't show it. The job interviews, he said. 11. Every company pulled back after the background check returned the pending litigation. 2 of them had the courtesy to tell me why. The others just stopped calling. She turned the water glass slowly in her hands. I applied to places I'd never have considered before. Marketing coordinator positions. Entry level. Nothing. The suit was too visible. He said, "When did you take the job at the hotel?" "April," she said. Vanessa, the manager, she didn't ask about the litigation. She asked if I had experience with clients and with attention to detail, and I said yes, and she hired me. She looked at the table. I don't think she knew what she was looking at. I think she just saw someone who needed work. She knew enough to see that Ethan said. Claire was quiet for a moment. "I was going to tell you," she said. "When you were done. When the Singapore deal was closed and you were back. I was going to have it handled by then." A small, hard exhale. "I wasn't going to be in a hotel uniform when you found out." "Claire, I had a plan," she said. "It was a bad plan, but I had one. I was going to use the wages to cover a legal consultation with someone better than the firm I'd been using. I had a timeline. I was about 6 weeks away from being able to move on it." He understood then with complete clarity why she hadn't called. It had nothing to do with the Singapore deal. It had nothing to do with protecting his focus or not wanting to be a burden. She had not called him because she had a plan, and she intended to execute it. And calling him meant giving up on the plan and asking to be rescued, and she would rather push a cleaning cart for 4 months than do that. He loved her, and it was maddening. "The software," he said. "The Callaway Ventures IP. Do you know what specifically they alleged you took?" She looked up. "Analytics Pipeline Framework. Something called the CV Metrics Suite. The filing says it's proprietary to Callaway's internal product team." Ethan went very still. He knew the CV Metrics Suite. He'd commissioned it himself 3 years ago. It was built by one developer, a contractor named Devon Park, no relation to James, and it lived entirely inside Callaway's closed development environment. It had never been licensed to any external party. It had never been pitched to anyone outside the company. "Fenwick isn't in our sector," he said. "They don't build data tools. There's no overlap." "I know," she said. She met his eyes. "I've never had access to anything at Callaway. I've never been in the building. The most contact I've had with Callaway Ventures is through you personally." "Then the allegation is fabricated," she said. "Yes. Yes, I know that. I just can't prove it from a studio in Humboldt Park." He reached across the table and picked up his phone. He looked at it for a moment, then set it back down. "I'm going to make a call tomorrow morning," he said. "An internal one." He looked at her. The CV Metrics Suite was never in any external system. For that software to show up in a complaint, someone had to take documentation from inside Callaway and manufacture a connection to you. That means the suit originated inside the company. She looked at him steadily. "I know," she said again. She said it quietly, and he understood that she'd had months to sit with the shape of this knowledge and nowhere to put it. "Who at Callaway has access to that suite's documentation?" she asked. He considered. "The development team. Legal. Gerald's office, historically through his old board advisory access. Rebecca, by extension. He said, I need to make that call tonight. He stood and crossed to the window. Below, the city moved. He dialed James Park's number. James picked up on the second ring. I need you at the Callaway office at 7 tomorrow morning, Ethan said. Pull everything we have on any IP filings in the past 18 months and get me the access log for the CV Metric Suites document repository. A pause. Everything. He ended the call. He stood at the window for a moment longer. Then he turned back to Claire. You should eat something, he said. And then I need you to tell me everything again from the beginning, with every detail you can remember about the timeline. She looked at the table at the food that had been sitting there untouched. You booked this room in September, she said. Yes. While you were in Singapore. Yes. She looked up at him. You already knew you were coming back to propose again. I already knew I wasn't going to let another week pass without making sure you knew I was coming home to you. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached for a fork and she said, Okay. From the beginning, the River North storage unit was in the basement of the building she'd lived in for 3 years. She still had the key because the landlord, a patient man named Thomas, who had rented to her since before Ethan had given her 60 days past the lease end to collect her things. Those 60 days were up in 2 weeks. Ethan had suggested they go in the morning, but she'd said no, let's go now, and he hadn't argued. He understood it without her explaining. She didn't want to let the night sit on what she'd told him without him seeing the full picture. They drove over in his rental car. The neighborhood was quiet this late. The storage room was a 10 by 12 concrete space lit by a single fluorescent, and it held everything Claire Weston owned in 24 banker's boxes stacked against the far wall, and a small leather suitcase he recognized from a trip they'd taken to Portland the year before. He stood in the doorway and looked at it. She came in behind him and went straight to the back wall, pulling out a box labeled in her handwriting, Legal Documentation, Do Not Move. This is what I've been working from, she said, setting it on top of another box and opening it. Inside file folders printed emails, the original lawsuit notice on firm letterhead copies of job applications with handwritten notes in the margins indicating the date each offer had been rescinded. She walked him through each folder. She did it the way she'd given quarterly presentations at Fenwick, clear sequenced, no filler. He understood watching her that she had organized this box not just for her own reference, but because some part of her had always known this was going to be a document she handed to someone else eventually. She'd been building a case in the only place she'd had room to build one. The lawsuit notice was dated February 9th. The termination letter from Fenwick's HR director, Dr. Sandra Chu, was dated February 11th, 48 hours. The job application timeline went from late February through mid-June, 11 positions, all rescinded at the same stage, all after the background check initiated. April 3rd, she said, pulling a folder. That's when I applied at the Harrington. They called me 2 days later. He looked at the date. 3 weeks after the last job offer collapsed. And this, she said, pulling a single sheet from the bottom of the box. She placed it on top. It was a page from the lawsuit's documentation exhibit, the technical specification sheet, for the CV Metric Suite, the specific document that allegedly proved Claire had accessed proprietary Callaway code. She'd highlighted a line near the top right corner, the file metadata. Created September 7th, 2024. He looked at the date. We met at the Meridian Partners Conference, he said slowly. October 14th, 2024, she said. He stared at the September date. 6 weeks before we met, and 11 months before I'd ever set foot in Callaway Ventures' office. She stood there with her arms crossed, not triumphant, just tired. I found it at 2 in the morning in February, right after I got the lawsuit notice. I was going through the documents trying to understand the technical claim, and I noticed the creation date didn't line up with anything. I checked the conference date twice to make sure I wasn't misremembering. You've had this since February, he said. Yes, and you couldn't move on it alone. No. The law firm I'd hired for the initial response had already pulled back when I couldn't make the retainer payment. To use this as a basis for a counterclaim, I'd need someone with full access to Callaway's internal file system to verify the document's provenance, where it was created, from what account, on what device. She looked at him steadily. I couldn't subpoena your own company's servers by myself, Ethan. He picked up the page and held it. September 2nd. His own company's document system had generated a file that predated any connection between Claire and Callaway Ventures, and someone had used it as the foundation of a lawsuit that had dismantled her life in 4 months. The document was created from inside Callaway's system. That wasn't a guess. The metadata made it certain. He said the only people with administrative access to the document repository for the CV Metrics suite are the development team, the legal department, and the executive advisory board. He paused. Gerald had advisory board access through his old login. He rarely used it, but the login was never deactivated. She watched his face. Rebecca has access to Gerald's professional accounts, he said. He wasn't asking. I don't know, Rebecca, Claire said. She said it carefully. We've met twice, at family dinners. She knows you, he said. She's been managing the family's administrative affairs for 18 years. If she had Gerald's credentials, he stopped. He put the paper back in the box. I need to see the access log, which is why James is pulling everything tomorrow morning. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, If it's her, then I'll deal with it. He said, Ethan. Her voice was measured. If it's her, she used your company's infrastructure to do this. That changes what we're dealing with. I know. The board is going to have to be involved. I know that too. She looked at him. He looked back. There was a conversation happening under the surface of this one about what it cost him to say that, about what it meant that his first instinct had been, I'll deal with it, rather than we'll see or maybe or let me look into it. He was already committed. She could see that, and he could see that she was deciding whether to let him be. Okay, she said finally. He lifted the documentation box. Is there anything else in here you need tonight? There's a folder in the back, labeled Timeline, she said. Take that one too. He set the documentation box on the floor and found the second folder, added it to the top. He looked around the storage space, the stacked boxes, the suitcase, the bare concrete walls. You need to get your things out of here before the 60 days are up, he said. I know. I'll figure out my place, he said. You have a key. You've always had a key. Use it. She looked at him. I'm not staying in Humboldt Park, she said, not arguing, just stating. Not because there's anything wrong with it, because I'm not going back there and starting from that point again. I need to move forward. Then move forward from my place, he said, until we know what we're dealing with. She considered this. Then she picked up the smaller box she'd brought down separately, personal items he assumed, and nodded once. Okay, she said. Forward. He carried the boxes to the car. On the way up the stairs, he photographed the metadata line on the specification sheet with his phone and sent it to James with a single note. This document was created 6 weeks before the subject had any known connection to Callaway Ventures. Pull the creation log for this file and any files with the same creator ID. Do it tonight. James's response came before he reached the parking level, already on it. I found something else in those filings. Talk tomorrow at 7. Ethan looked at the message. He did not text back. He loaded the boxes into the trunk and got in the driver's seat. Claire was already in the passenger seat looking straight ahead at the dark street. "What does James say?" she asked. "He found something in the filings. He wants to talk tomorrow." She said nothing. She had learned 8 months ago that some things you can't do anything about tonight, and so you wait. He started the car. The city moved past them as he drove late and lit the lake somewhere to their right, the storage unit behind them. She didn't look back. James Park had been Ethan's attorney for 9 years, and more relevantly, his friend for 11. He was a precise man who kept meticulous records and almost never said anything he hadn't thought through 3 times first. So when Ethan arrived at Callaway Ventures at 6:58 a.m. and found James already in the conference room with 2 laptops open and a coffee he hadn't touched, he understood something significant was in the room before James said a word. "Show me," Ethan said, setting down his own coffee and pulling out a chair. James turned one of the laptops to face him. On the screen was Callaway's internal document repository access log exported by the IT director at 6 that morning, on James's authorization. The CV metric suite specification document that appears in the lawsuit exhibit, James said. That specific file was created in Callaway's internal system 14 months ago, September 2nd, 2024. You already know that. Here's what I found overnight. He pointed to a line in the access log. The file was created using an active user session. User ID GCW Advisory 001. That's Gerald Callaway's advisory board login. Gerald's login, Ethan repeated. His login. Not necessarily Gerald. James clicked to the next screen. The session originated from an IP address registered to the Kenilworth estate, specifically to a device in the Home Office subnet. He paused. Gerald has a dedicated laptop for advisory board work. It stays in his study. He uses it maybe twice a year for document review and sign-offs. Another click. The device that created this file is registered in the system as RC Home Office 02. The RC stands for Rebecca Callaway. Ethan read the device name twice. Her home office laptop created a file using Gerald's advisory login, he said. Yes. Which means she either had his credentials, she would. Ethan said. Gerald gives her access to everything administrative. He's trusted her with his accounts since the day they married. He leaned back. She used his login to create a fabricated technical document inside Callaway's system, then used that document as the evidentiary basis of a civil suit filed against Claire, using a law firm Rebecca retained personally for estate matters, James said. Harmon Wick and Reyes. I pulled the firm's client record. Rebecca Callaway has been a client since 2019. She used them for a trust amendment and a property transfer. He paused. There is no record of Callaway Ventures as a corporate client of that firm, which means the suit was filed in the company's name without proper authorization. Ethan, she filed a civil lawsuit purportedly on behalf of Callaway Ventures, without board authorization, without legal department sign-off, without your knowledge. And Gerald? I don't know yet what Gerald knew. That's a separate question. James closed one of the laptops. But the institutional fraud is clear. She used Gerald's credentials, used the company's name, used a personally retained firm. He looked at Ethan directly. This isn't a family dispute. What she did is tortious interference and fraud. Arguably wire fraud depending on how the communications were structured. Ethan stood and walked to the window. 41 floors up the city spread out below them in early morning gray. He'd built this company from a 2-person operation in a Lincoln Park basement. The CV Metrics suite was the first proprietary tool they'd developed internally, the thing that had finally convinced institutional investors they were serious, and Rebecca had used its documentation as a weapon in her own private war. What did she want? James said. It wasn't really a question, Claire Ethan said. She wanted Claire gone before I came home. James was quiet for a moment. Because she knew you were going to propose. I told the family in September when I extended the Singapore timeline. I said I was coming home and I was going to ask Claire again formally with a ring. Not the first time anymore, the real time. He paused. Rebecca would have had 6 weeks between that conversation and when she filed the suit. She moved fast. She always moves fast when she thinks she's protecting something. Ethan turned from the window. She's been managing the Calloway family's affairs for 18 years. She's been managing Gerald for 18 years. Claire marrying me was a structural change she wasn't going to let happen quietly. James nodded slowly. Then we need to move carefully. If she finds out we've pulled the logs, she'll act. She has resources, lawyers, relationships, access to Gerald's signature if she needs it. He paused. Have you spoken to Gerald? Not yet. Don't yet. Not until we have the full picture. I need 3 things before we approach Gerald, the hotel manager's account. A legal opinion on whether the suit can be vacated on the basis of unauthorized filing and Claire's formal statement about the timeline. He looked at Ethan. One more thing. The law firm Harmon Wick and Reyes. I reached out this morning to verify the filing authorization. They're being evasive, which means either someone told them to be, or they know there's an exposure problem and they're managing it. Put them on notice, Ethan said. Already drafted. But James paused. There's something else you need to know. I spoke with someone in the Fenwick legal department last night. Informally. The termination notice, they acted on the one that came through HR on February 11th. It wasn't just the lawsuit filing. There was also a phone call. The week before the suit was filed, Dr. Sandra Chu received a call from a woman who identified herself as Rebecca Calloway, wife of Gerald Calloway, advisory board member of Calloway Ventures, calling to alert Fenwick that an employee had a serious IP conflict that was going to result in legal action. Ethan looked at him. She called Claire's employer a week before filing the lawsuit, he said. Pre-positioned the narrative, James said. So when the lawsuit arrived, it landed in a context that HR had already been primed to treat as legitimate. He picked up his coffee, looked at it, set it back down. She's organized. She had a timeline. This wasn't reactive, she planned every step. How long between when I told the family I was proposing and when she filed? If you told them in September, early September, the 8th. James did the math silently. 6 weeks, he said. She built this in 6 weeks. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Pull the hotel's security footage, he said. Claire mentioned that the Harrington manager told her a woman had come in asking about her before she even applied. If that happened, there should be footage. I'll file a motion to preserve it today, James said, before anyone can request a deletion. He made a note. And the hotel manager, what's her name? Vanessa Torres. I'll request a formal meeting. Ethan nodded. He put on his jacket. What I need from you in the next 48 hours, he said, is the access log certified, the fraud filing drafted, and the lawsuit against Claire reviewed for a vacatur on unauthorized filing grounds. He paused at the door. And James, keep this inside this room for now. No one at Calloway outside of you and IT has seen this yet. James said, What are you going to do? I'm going to see Rebecca, Ethan said. I want to see her face when I ask her about the CV metrics suite. I want to see what she says before she has a lawyer in the room. James considered this. She'll deny everything, I know, Ethan said. But you can learn a great deal from exactly how someone denies something. He left the conference room and took the elevator down. In the lobby, he called Claire. She picked up on the second ring. He could hear traffic. She was already outside. James found the access log, he said. The document in the lawsuit was created from a device registered to Rebecca from inside the house. Silence on the line. Then she said very quietly, "She called the hotel." He stopped walking. "What?" "Before I applied," she said. "Vanessa, when I first took the job, she mentioned that a woman had called and asked about me specifically. I thought it was a background check firm. But the call came the week before my first interview there, and I hadn't told anyone I was applying." "Then she knew you were going to end up there," he said slowly. "Or she arranged it," Claire said. "If she'd blocked every other option carefully enough, then the hotel wasn't a coincidence," he said. "She wanted me to come home and find you there." A long pause. "Yes," Claire said. "I think so." He stood on the sidewalk outside Callaway Ventures building, the city moving around him. "I'm going to see her tonight," he said. "Be careful," Claire said. Not a warning about safety. A warning about something else, about what it costs to see someone you thought you knew clearly for the first time. "I will," he said. He hung up. He stood there for another moment. Then he flagged a cab and gave the Kenilworth address. The Callaway family estate in Kenilworth was a 1920s Georgian revival on a lot large enough to feel like its own terrain lake view from the East Wing formal gardens on the south side that Rebecca had redesigned twice in 18 years. Ethan had grown up knowing this house as the place his father moved to after the divorce, with a woman Ethan had tried for a long time to find reasons to trust. He didn't call ahead. Rebecca answered the door herself, which surprised him. She was in her usual evening mode, a cashmere cardigan, reading glasses pushed up on her head, and her expression when she saw him was the specific warmth she deployed for unannounced arrivals, pleased, composed, just a degree too immediate. "Ethan," she said, "you didn't tell us you were home." She leaned in for the cheek-to-cheek, and he let her. "Gerald's at the club." "Come in." He came in. In the sitting room, pale walls, the painting Gerald had commissioned the year he retired, the fireplace with the photograph of the three of them at Ethan's first board meeting on the mantel. She offered tea. He declined. She sat. He stayed standing. "I want to talk about the CV metrics suite," he said. Not a shift in her expression, not a flinch. Just a slight settling, the way someone settles when they've prepared for a conversation and have decided to let the other person set the terms. "That's a specific place to start," she said. "I pulled the internal access log this morning," he said. "The specification document that appears in the civil suit against Claire Weston was created from a device registered to you on Gerald's advisory login on September 2nd of this year." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I'm aware of the document." "Then you know it predates Claire Weston's entire relationship with this company or anyone in it. Metadata can be manipulated," she said. "File creation dates can be altered. That's the entire nature of IP theft, obscuring the origin." She said it without blinking, without hesitating, with the calm of someone who had rehearsed the answer and decided it was sufficient. "Manipulated by whom?" he said. "The document was created from your device, your login, inside Callaway's closed system. Gerald gave me access to his advisory account for administrative purposes years ago," she said. "A great deal of Callaway's early filing infrastructure went through that login. The fact that my device appears in a log doesn't mean I was involved in anything improper." He looked at her. "You filed a civil lawsuit in Callaway Ventures' name without board authorization, without legal department approval, without my knowledge. I acted on what the company's legal counsel advised was necessary," she said. She was very smooth. 18 years of practice. "When a credible IP threat is identified, speed matters. The board can ratify. There is no board ratification pending," he said. The lawsuit was filed through your personal firm, not Callaway's general counsel, not any attorney who has ever worked with this company. He paused. You used Gerald's credential and a personal relationship with a private law firm to destroy a woman's career, her finances, and her professional reputation. And you timed it to happen while I was out of contact. A silence settled between them. Rebecca set down her teacup. She looked at him with something that was almost appraising. Claire Weston is not what you think she is, she said. It was gentle even. Like she was correcting a misunderstanding. I've known women like her. Women who move deliberately into proximity with wealth and position. She knew who you were within 5 minutes of meeting you. As did I, he said. That's typically how introduction works. Ethan. She softened her voice. I've been protecting this family for 18 years. That's what I do. What I have always done. If I was aggressive in my approach to this, you filed a fraud, he said. And then you arranged for Claire to be precisely placed where I would find her when I returned. You called the Harrington Grand before she applied. You asked questions about her specifically. By name. The first real pause. A beat too long. I don't know what the manager told you. She has documentation, he said. The call is logged, and the security footage from that day has been preserved by court order as of this morning. He watched her very carefully. He saw the calculation behind her eyes, what he knew, what he might be able to prove, what remained uncertain. It was a fast, skilled calculation. She'd been doing this for a long time. The company has more to lose from this than Claire does, she said finally. Her voice was still even, still measured. Think about what a public dispute over internal IP and board malfeasance does to Callaway's valuation, to the acquisition pipeline you've been building. There are better ways to handle this than litigation. You're threatening the company, he said. I'm advising you, she said, as someone who has protected Callaway's interests since before your name was on the door. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Where is Gerald a flicker? I told you. The club. I'm going to need to speak with him, Ethan said. Not through you, directly. Whatever questions you have, I can directly, he said again. He picked up his jacket. I'd suggest you speak with your personal counsel tonight. The board meeting is Monday. He walked to the door. Behind him, he heard her stand. Ethan. Her voice changed, not threatening, something more like the tone she used when he was in his 20s, and she was trying to redirect him. This will damage more than you know. He turned at the door. He looked at her from across the room. That's what I've been thinking about, he said. How much damage you've already done and who actually absorbed it. He left. In the car, he called Claire. She picked up on the first ring. She denied it, he said. Cleanly and specifically. She had answers prepared. Claire was quiet for a moment. She knew you were coming. Yes. Someone at Callaway tipped her. She knew we'd pulled the logs. He paused. She also threatened to bring this company into it. Valuation damage acquisition pipeline. She said it with perfect composure. What does James say? I haven't called him yet. But she made one mistake. He paused. She knew about the hotel footage before I mentioned that the court order had been filed. I said the footage had been preserved. She responded to that before I told her it was security footage. She said she didn't know what the manager had told me. Which means she already knew what the footage might show. Silence on the line. Then Claire said, So she's already thinking about the hotel. Yes. She's going to try to get to Vanessa. He said, I know. He was already dialing James's number on the second line. That's why we're not going to let her. He merged the calls. James, he said. She knows about the footage. Move on the Harrington first thing tomorrow. And I need to talk to Gerald directly without her present. Find out when he's at the club and when he comes home. James said there's something else. That journalist Marcus Webb, he contacted Claire's old Fenwick email account this afternoon. Ethan went still. What journalist, he said. James said, that's the question we need to answer by tomorrow morning. Vanessa Torres had worked at the Harrington Grand for 11 years. She'd started as a front desk associate and worked her way up through events, then operations to hotel manager 3 years ago. She ran a clean department and kept meticulous incident logs because she'd learned early that the only thing protecting you in a dispute was documentation you'd made at the time, not memory assembled afterward. She met Ethan and Claire in her office on the administrative level at 9 the following morning. She was a compact woman in her late 30s who shook hands with a directness that suggested she was not accustomed to being in the presence of a billionaire, and had decided in advance not to treat it differently than anything else. I'm glad you came, she said, looking at Claire more than at Ethan. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, Claire said. What this was connected to, Vanessa shook her head. I had my guesses. She opened a drawer in her desk and placed a USB drive on the table. When the court order came through this morning to preserve footage, I was relieved. I'd already backed up everything relevant and kept it on an external drive at my home. I wasn't sure it mattered, but I had a feeling. You backed it up before the order, Ethan said. 6 months ago, Vanessa said. The week after the woman came in, she explained. It had been a Tuesday in April, 3 weeks before Claire had applied for the cleaning position. A woman came to the Harringtons' front desk around midday, asked to speak with the manager. Vanessa had come down. The woman said she was conducting a background review on a prospective hire and needed to verify employment protocols, specifically whether the hotel hired staff currently involved in civil litigation and what the background check process involved. She knew Claire's name, Vanessa said. She asked whether a Claire Weston had applied or inquired about positions. I said I didn't share information about individual applicants for privacy reasons. She asked about our standard onboarding timeline and whether housekeeping positions required credit or financial background checks. Vanessa paused. She was very specific. She knew how to ask without quite asking. And you wrote it down, Claire said. I wrote it down. I also flagged her to security. As a potential pre-employment intelligence gatherer, we have a protocol for that. There are people who come in trying to learn our HR process for various reasons, some of them competitive. She touched the USB drive. The lobby camera caught her at the desk for about 4 minutes. Clear angle. She gave the front desk associate her name when she asked to see the manager. What name? James said. He was sitting slightly back, tablet open. Rebecca Calloway, Vanessa said. The room was quiet. She used her real name, Ethan said. She would, James said, not looking up from his notes. At that point, she had no reason to think any of this would be connected. She was still building the architecture. She used her name because it gave her authority. The Calloway name opens doors. Claire was looking at the USB drive. She did this 3 weeks before I applied, she said. She said it quietly, like she was recalculating something. Yes, Vanessa said. Which means she wasn't surveilling you after you arrived here. She was setting up the stage before you came. She looked at Claire directly. She wanted to know what you'd look like from the outside once you were here. She wanted to understand the environment you'd be seen in. A pause. And she gave us her real name because she needed to. She wanted the hotel to treat her question as legitimate. And in our world, that name is legitimate. She planned for him to come here, Claire said. She wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. She knew he would go to the Harrington. It's the hotel he always uses when he's in Chicago. It's the hotel where he proposed. If he came home and I wasn't at the apartment and he looked for me, this is where he'd end up. She looked up. She didn't just destroy my options. She funneled me here, toward the one place she knew he'd see me. No one spoke. Then James said very quietly, "She wanted you to see Claire this way. She wanted the shock to be the first thing you felt. Whatever doubt that planted, she was counting on it to do the rest of the work." Ethan looked at the USB drive on Vanessa's desk. He thought about standing in the hotel lobby the night before seeing Claire with the cart. The specific way that image had settled in him, not doubt exactly, but the sensation of something shifting, of having to recalibrate. Rebecca had designed that moment. She'd built it the way you build a set from the outside in, and she'd left just enough exits blocked that Claire would end up walking into it. "I need to ask you something," Ethan said, turning to Vanessa. "When you hired Claire, what made you decide to hire her?" Vanessa looked at him. She was overqualified for the position, and she knew it. She didn't try to hide that or explain it away. She just said she needed work, and she was good at anything that required attention and care. A pause. "I've managed a lot of people. You learn to recognize when someone is in a temporary situation versus a permanent one. She was temporary." Another pause. "And she was a good employee. She never missed a shift. She covered for people when they needed it. She didn't complain." Claire was looking at the table. "I want to give a formal statement," Vanessa said. "Whatever you need. I kept the logs, I have the footage, I have the incident notation from April. I'll put it in writing." "James will coordinate with you this week," Ethan said. He paused. "I don't know how to adequately—" "You don't need to," Vanessa said. She needed someone to not ask too many questions, and I was in a position to do that. That's all it was. She looked at Claire again. "I hope you get it all sorted." Claire said, "Thank you." It was simple and direct, and Vanessa seemed to understand that in this case, simple and direct was the right weight for it. They left the office. In the elevator back to the lobby, Claire held the copy of the USB drive James had made. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "She came here before I knew I was going to need a job." "Yes," Ethan said. "That means she was confident enough in her plan to assume I'd end up here. She blocked every other path." Claire looked at the elevator doors. "She was right about the outcome," she said. "She just wasn't right about what it would make you think." He turned to look at her. "She thought I'd see you in that uniform and think less of you," he said. "She doesn't know what it looked like to me." "What did it look like?" "Like someone who survived something," he said, and was still moving. The elevator opened onto the lobby. Through the wide front windows, the morning light was coming off the lake. The Harringtons' lobby was beginning to fill with the business of the day checkout carts. A conference group gathering near the ballroom doors, the front desk staff, moving with the practiced efficiency of a place that ran on routine. Claire looked at the lobby for a moment. "Monday," James said beside them. "We'll be ready for the board meeting on Monday." He looked at Ethan. "Gerald first. Before Rebecca hears about the footage. Today," Ethan said. "I'll go to the club." He was already reaching for his phone. The email arrived at 2:14 p.m. Claire was at Ethan's place, his apartment in the Gold Coast, which she'd been in and out of enough times that she knew where he kept the coffee and which window leaked cold air in October. She was at the dining table with her laptop when it came through to the Fenwick email address she'd kept active as a professional contact. A message from Marcus Webb, staff writer at the Chicago Tribune, requesting a comment on a story scheduled to publish in 5 days. She read it twice, then she read it a third time. The subject line was, "Request for comment Callaway Ventures IP dispute, Weston." The body of the email described a story Marcus was finalizing about, in his words, a civil fraud matter involving a former marketing executive, and her alleged role in a pattern of corporate misconduct, including misappropriation of proprietary technology and potential securities disclosure issues related to Callaway Ventures' upcoming Series B extension. Securities disclosure. The phrase was careful and alarming. It implied that Claire's alleged conduct had created exposure for Callaway's next funding round. It implied ongoing harm, not just historical misappropriation. She took a screenshot. Then she called Ethan. He was still at the club with Gerald. He picked up on the third ring. "I have something," she said. A journalist. Marcus Webb Tribune. "He's publishing in 5 days. The story is about me and the lawsuit, but he's framing it as ongoing securities exposure for Callaway's Series B." A pause. "Forward me the email," Ethan said. She did. He read it while she waited. She could hear him moving, probably stepping out of wherever he'd been with Gerald. "Marcus Webb," he said. "I know that name. His byline is mostly business coverage. Old money Chicago profiles. He wrote a piece on the Callaway Foundation Gala 2 years ago," Ethan said. Rebecca was the point of contact. Neither of them needed to say it. "I'm calling James," he said. "We need to meet with Webb before he publishes anything." James arranged the meeting for early the following morning, a conference room at James's firm, not at Callaway, and not at the Tribune. Marcus Webb arrived at 7:45 a.m., alone with a messenger bag, and the particular focused expression of someone who had been told the meeting was important, and had spent the night trying to anticipate what that meant. He was a man in his late 40s, rangy, with the watchful quality of someone whose job had taught him to notice things. He shook hands and sat and put a recorder on the table, then looked at Ethan and waited. Ethan said, "Before you begin recording, I want to show you something." He placed 4 documents on the table. James narrated. The first, the CV Metrics Suite specification document from the lawsuit, with the metadata highlighted. Creation date 14 months ago. 6 weeks before Claire's first contact with anyone at Callaway Ventures. The second, the access log showing Rebecca Callaway's device creating the file on Gerald's advisory login. The third, the incident log from the Harrington Grand, and the still frame from the lobby footage time stamped April 9th, showing a woman the log identified as Rebecca Callaway, speaking with the front desk associate. 3 weeks before Claire applied. The fourth, a statement from Dr. Sandra Chu at Fenwick Group, signed the previous afternoon, confirming that the termination decision was initiated by an external phone call from a woman identifying herself as Rebecca Callaway, not by any internal review or finding. Marcus Webb looked at the documents in the order they were placed. He was quiet for a long time. "The story I was writing," he said slowly, "was sourced primarily through a PR contact who connected me to documentation provided by a third party." "What documentation?" James asked. "Email records from a Callaway Ventures internal account showing Claire Weston receiving forwarded technical briefings from a Callaway developer." He paused. "They would appear to confirm the access alleged in the suit." "We'd like to see them," James said. Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out a printed packet. He placed it on the table. James looked through it. His expression was neutral, which Ethan recognized as the specific neutral James adopted when something confirmed his worst expectation. "These emails reference a developer named Devin Park," James said. "The Callaway developer who built the CV Metrics Suite." He looked up at Marcus. "Devin Park left Callaway Ventures 17 months ago. These emails are dated 8 months ago after he was gone. They're fabricated. The email headers will show this." Marcus Webb looked at the packet in James's hands. "I was given these as source documentation," he said. "By the same PR contact who connected you to the story," Ethan said. "Yes, that firm has a relationship with Rebecca Callaway that goes back at least 2 years," James said. "I can provide that documentation as well." Marcus was quiet again. He picked up the recorder on the table and looked at it. then put it back without turning it on. The story I was about to publish, he said, would have run simultaneously with the civil suit's expected settlement. It was written to seal the narrative independent corroboration from the press on the same day the legal matter concluded quietly. He said it flatly, like reading a timeline. The settlement would have included an NDA, meaning the story would stand indefinitely, Claire said. It was the first thing she'd said since they'd sat down, with no one legally permitted to correct it. Marcus looked at her. He said, "Who fed me this story was planning something more extensive than a lawsuit. They were planning a permanent record." "Yes," Claire said. He was quiet for a moment longer. Then he said, "I'm not going to publish the story as written. I'm going to need some time to investigate what I was actually handed." He looked at James. "The fabricated emails, can your technical team document the header irregularities in a format I can use for a separate story?" "Yes," James said. "And the hotel footage, is that part of the evidentiary record?" "It will be at the board meeting Monday," Ethan said. "You'll have a copy of everything that's presented there." Marcus nodded. He gathered his things slowly. At the door he turned back. "Claire Weston," he said. He wasn't using her name as an address. It sounded more like he was noting it. "If I'd published what I had, I know," she said. "I'm sorry," he said. He said it simply, without the weight of a man trying to mitigate his culpability. Just the straightforward acknowledgement of someone who had nearly made something terrible permanent. "I know," she said again. He left. James looked at Ethan. "Monday," he said. "We have everything we need." He paused. "Except one thing. We need Gerald's statement on the record before the meeting. If he's on the board's record as unaware of the filing that separates him from Rebecca and makes the fraud picture clean." "I spoke with him yesterday," Ethan said. "He knew something was wrong. He didn't know what. He's ready to talk." James said, "Bring him in Saturday, before Rebecca has the weekend to work on him." Ethan nodded. He looked at Claire. She was looking at the 4 documents still spread across the table: the access log, the Harrington footage, Sandra Chu's statement, the metadata page. She'd found herself at 2 a.m. in a Humboldt Park studio. "She built something very complete," Claire said. "Yes," James said. "But she assumed you wouldn't have time to notice the timestamp." Claire looked at him. "I wasn't supposed to," she said. "I was supposed to be too exhausted and too broke to read closely." A pause. "She didn't account for the fact that I had nothing else to do." James said, "That's the thing about a plan designed to overwhelm someone into submission. It has to account for what the person does when they're not submitting." She didn't. Claire picked up the metadata page and looked at it one more time. Then she set it face down on the table. "Saturday," she said. "Let's get Gerald's statement." Gerald Calloway came to James Park's office on Saturday morning at 10. He came alone, which Ethan had not been certain he would do. Gerald was 64, a man who had spent his working life moving through the world with the assistance of intermediaries, assistants, advisors, a second wife who had over 18 years become his primary interface with anything requiring action or decision. Coming alone was already a statement. He was wearing a suit, which was unusual for a Saturday, and he sat down across from Ethan with the posture of a man who had been rehearsing something and was now uncertain whether the rehearsal was the right version. "I'm not going to pretend this isn't what it is," Gerald said. He said it before Ethan could speak. "I'd rather just say that directly, and then answer whatever you need to ask." James set a recorder on the table, visible, not hidden, and looked at Gerald. Gerald nodded. "When did you first know about the lawsuit?" Ethan said. Gerald folded his hands. "Rebecca told me in late January that she'd identified a potential IP concern involving someone at Fenwick Group. She said she'd consulted with legal and that action was being taken through the company's protocols. A pause. She said you'd been notified through the Singapore communication channel and had authorized the process to proceed without board input given the time sensitivity. Did you see any communication from me? Ethan said. No. Gerald said it plainly. She told me the communication was encrypted and logged separately. I had no reason at the time to doubt that. Another pause. I should have asked to see it. I didn't. When did you learn the details of the lawsuit? When it was filed? February. Rebecca showed me the filing documents. By that point, she framed it as a completed action. The legal process was already moving. He looked at his hands. She said the woman had been damaging the company and that the response was appropriate and proportionate. He stopped. She named Claire specifically. By that point, I'd met Claire twice at family dinners. I was surprised. And I told Rebecca I was surprised. She said I didn't have full context and that the legal team had been thorough. Did you raise any objection? James asked. I said I thought it was aggressive, Gerald said. She said the company's reputation was at stake and that you, Ethan, would understand the necessity when you returned. He paused. I let it go. I shouldn't have let it go. He said the last 4 words with the particular flatness of someone stating a fact they've had a great deal of time to sit with. The advisory login, Ethan said. Your credentials. When did you last use them independently? A year ago. Signing off on a document retention review. He looked at Ethan. Rebecca has had access to my accounts for administrative purposes for many years. Bill payments correspondence when I travel. I gave her that access when we married. A pause. I understand what the log shows. Did she tell you she'd created any documentation in that system? James said. No. Gerald's voice was flat. If she had, I don't know what I would have done. But she didn't tell me. Ethan watched his father. Gerald looked tired in a specific way, not sleepless, but like someone who had been carrying something heavy for months and had decided this morning to put it down without knowing quite what that meant for where he went next. There's a journalist, Ethan said, Marcus Webb. He was going to publish a story about Claire sourced through a PR firm connected to Rebecca. The story would have run the same week the civil suit settled, sealing the narrative publicly. Gerald closed his eyes for a moment. I didn't know about that either. I believe you, Ethan said. Gerald opened his eyes and looked at him. Do you? Yes. What I need from you is what James outlined, a formal written statement under oath about what you knew when you knew it, what you authorized, and what you didn't. Specifically, that you did not authorize the lawsuit filing through Harmon Wick and Reyes, and that you were told the action had my approval when it did not. I'll sign it, Gerald said immediately. James slid the document across the table. It had been drafted Friday afternoon. Gerald read it carefully. He read it the way someone reads something important, not skimming, not checking, but actually reading. Ethan watched him. When Gerald finally looked up, he said, This is accurate. I know, Ethan said. Gerald signed. James countersigned as witness. The document was dated and scanned into the record. Then Gerald sat back and was quiet for a moment. When you were 26, he said, and you were building Callaway from a shared office in Lincoln Park, I didn't help you. I should have. I could have. I had connections and resources, and I told myself you needed to do it yourself because that's what I believed. But I also think I was afraid of being wrong about you, and then having to be wrong in front of her. He paused. I let her manage my relationship with my own son. I've been doing that for 18 years. Ethan said nothing. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Gerald said. I don't think that's the appropriate ask right now. I just want you to know that I know what I've been doing. He looked at the signed statement on the table. This is the first thing I've signed in years without checking with her first. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How is she going to respond when she finds out about this?" Gerald said she'll call me. She'll say I've made a mistake. She'll have a version of events ready that repositions her actions as protective. She's very good at that. He paused. But she's already made the mistake. You can't rehearse your way out of what's in that access log. She'll try, James said. I know, Gerald said. But she'll be doing it without my cooperation. He stood and buttoned his jacket. Tell me what else you need from me. I'm available. Ethan looked at his father. There was a version of this conversation he'd imagined having someday. Not about a lawsuit, but about other things. About the years between 22 and 30. About the choices Gerald had made and not made. That conversation would still need to happen, but it would have to wait. Monday morning, Ethan said, The board meeting is at 9. I'd like you there, not as a board member, as a witness. Gerald said, I'll be there. After Gerald left, James leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. We're ready, he said. Access log hotel footage, choose statement, Webb's retraction of the sourced material, and now Gerald's signed admission. He paused. The only gap is direct evidence connecting Rebecca personally to the communication chain, but her device ID and the access log, combined with the signed statement that Gerald didn't authorize the filing, closes that gap effectively. Ethan looked at the recording on the table still running. There's one more thing, he said. He looked at James. She's going to do something this weekend. She knows Monday is coming and she knows what we have. She'll do something. What kind of something she'll go to, Claire, Ethan said. She'll try to settle it outside the board meeting. A direct approach, a number, an NDA. He paused. She'll want to make it go away before it becomes an institutional record. James considered this. Should we warn Claire? I already did, Ethan said. Last night. He paused. I also told her if Rebecca approaches her directly, she should listen to everything Rebecca says. James raised an eyebrow. And then James said. Ethan looked at the table. And then Claire will handle it, he said. The way she handles everything. On Sunday morning, Claire walked to the small grocery store 2 blocks from Ethan's apartment and bought coffee and bread and the particular kind of orange marmalade she'd been living without for 4 months. Because it cost $4 more than the generic, and $4 had mattered. She paid without calculating it. That felt like something. She was on her way back when the car pulled up. It was a dark sedan, clean and quiet, which stopped at the curb just ahead of her. The driver's side window stayed up. The passenger door opened and Rebecca Calloway stepped out. She was dressed precisely for a Sunday morning, light wool coat, pearl earrings, the kind of put-togetherness that takes effort to produce and is intended to communicate ease. She looked at Claire the way someone looks at a problem they have decided to solve personally. Claire, she gestured toward the small recessed entrance of a parking structure nearby, out of the wind, slightly more private than the sidewalk. A few minutes. Claire looked at her. She shifted the grocery bag to her other hand. Oh, she said. They moved into the parking structure entrance. The Sunday morning street moved behind them, a cyclist, a couple walking a dog, the city going about its business. Rebecca did not waste time. I know Ethan has a board meeting tomorrow, she said. I know what he plans to present. She looked at Claire directly. I want to offer you an alternative to that process. What kind of alternative? A settlement. The civil suit would be withdrawn today. You would receive a sum. I'm authorized to move quickly on this that would allow you to rebuild without the legal overhead. She paused. In exchange for a standard confidentiality agreement. Nothing about Calloway, nothing about the family, nothing about the circumstances that brought you to the Harrington Grand. Claire had her phone in her jacket pocket. She had pressed the record button before she stepped into the parking structure entrance. How much, she said. Rebecca named a figure. It was precise and calibrated, significant enough to communicate seriousness, but structured around what would be plausible as an informal settlement below the threshold that would require Calloway Ventures board notification. That amount, Claire said, would require you to fund it personally. That's correct, Rebecca said. She said it without hesitation. This doesn't need to involve the company. Claire looked at her. If you're offering a personal settlement, then you're acknowledging that the lawsuit was a personal action, Claire said. A brief pause. I'm acknowledging that the matter can be resolved personally, Rebecca said, with the precision of someone who had worked out exactly which words were and weren't admissions. I see. Claire shifted the grocery bag again. What happens if I don't take the offer? Then the board meeting proceeds, Rebecca said. And board processes are slow and adversarial and expensive. And whatever Ethan plans to present will be contested by counsel, who will make the process take a very long time. She said it evenly. I want to be honest with you about that. I appreciate honesty, Claire said. I also want to be direct, Rebecca said. Her tone shifted, not threatening exactly, but moving into the register of someone who is done being polite. What happened to your professional situation was the result of a credible assessment of risk to the company. If this proceeds to litigation and discovery, there will be a second look at your professional history. Your communications, your access patterns at Fenwick. I know people who conduct that kind of review very thoroughly. A second look, Claire said. Things can be structured differently, Rebecca said, depending on what the circumstances require. So if I don't accept the settlement, Claire said, you'll construct a second set of allegations, structured differently. Rebecca looked at her. Something moved in her expression, not quite acknowledgement, but close enough. I think you're a practical woman, she said. I think you understand that the path that gets you out of this cleanest is the path that involves the fewest people and the least institutional scrutiny. A pause. Ethan's loyalty is real. I don't question that. But loyalty has limits when the cost to the company becomes visible enough. I've watched him make hard decisions for 17 years. He will make this one too. Claire said nothing for a moment. The Sunday morning continued behind them. A car passed. Then Claire said, You came here yourself. On a Sunday morning. You knew where I was. Ethan's address isn't a secret, Rebecca said. No, Claire said. I meant you came yourself. Not a lawyer. Not a PR person. You. Rebecca was still. That's what I said in the lawsuit, Claire continued. To the legal team I briefly had. I said whoever did this came themselves to the hotel. Gave their real name. Built it personally. That's not how corporations handle IP disputes. That's how individuals handle something personal. She looked at Rebecca directly. You came here because you think talking to me is still safer than letting the board meeting happen. And you came because you need me to agree to something before tomorrow. Rebecca's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. I'm giving you a way out, she said. Take it. I appreciate you being so specific, Claire said. She stepped back onto the sidewalk. She did not look behind her. She walked the 2 blocks back to Ethan's building at a pace she chose deliberately, not fast, not slow. In the elevator, she sent the audio file to James. His reply came before she reached the apartment door. Perfect. This is everything. Don't go anywhere alone until after the board meeting. She put her key in the lock and opened the door. Ethan was in the kitchen. He looked up when she came in. She set the grocery bag on the counter. She looked at him. She came, she said. He put down what he was holding. What did she say? Claire told him. The settlement figure, the alternative threat, the language about things being structured differently. She told him each piece in sequence the way she'd laid out the documentation box in the River North storage unit, clear-ordered without editorializing. When she was done, Ethan was quiet for a moment. She threatened you directly, he said. On the record, Claire said. James has it. He exhaled slowly. He looked at her. You're okay, he said. Yes. She paused. I was scared for about 30 seconds. Then I thought about the timestamp on that specification document, and I wasn't scared anymore. He came around the counter. He stood in front of her. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she said. He reached out and took the grocery bag she'd been still holding and set it on the counter. Sit down, he said. I'll make the coffee. She sat down. Outside the window, Chicago moved through its Sunday. The lake was gray and specific under an October sky, and in the kitchen, coffee began. Monday, 9:02 a.m. The Callaway Ventures boardroom on the 41st floor. There were 6 board members, a general counsel brought in from outside the company at James's request, and James himself at the far end of the table. Gerald Callaway sat in the single chair against the wall, not at the table, not as a board member, but present. Ethan was at the head of the table. Rebecca was in her usual seat, 2 chairs to the left of center in a charcoal jacket, both hands on the table. She had arrived 8 minutes early. Ethan had been there for 40. I want to address a matter that has come to my attention since returning from Singapore, Ethan said. He did not use the words, I've called this meeting. He did not offer preamble. It involves the unauthorized use of Callaway Ventures' name and infrastructure in a civil lawsuit, filed in February of this year, and a pattern of conduct intended to damage an individual who has no professional connection to this company. He nodded at James. James placed the first document in front of each board member, physical copies, a clean packet. The first item was the metadata page from the specification document CV Metrics Suite creation date September 2, 24. The specification document attached as a primary exhibit in the civil suit against Claire Weston, Montbras. James said was created 14 months ago. The person named in the lawsuit had no contact with Callaway Ventures or any of its principals until 6 weeks after this document's creation date. He placed the second document, the access log excerpt. The file was created on a device registered to Rebecca Callaway using the advisory board login of Gerald Callaway. The creation occurred in Callaway's internal document repository, to which Rebecca had access through Gerald's long-term administrative authorization. A member of the board, a woman named Patricia Ashe, who had been on the board for 7 years and who Ethan had always found reliable for the precision of her attention, looked from the access log to Rebecca without expression. Rebecca was looking at the documents. Her hands were still on the table. The civil suit was filed through Harmon Wick, and Reyes James continued, a firm that has no relationship with Callaway Ventures and has been personally retained by Rebecca Callaway since 2019 for estate and personal legal matters. The filing was not authorized by this board, was not reviewed by Callaway's general counsel, and was not, as the person who filed it represented to Gerald Callaway, communicated to or approved by Ethan Callaway. Gerald from the wall chair said nothing. He sat with his hands in his lap and looked at the table. The third item, James said, placing the hotel documentation and the still frame from Vanessa Torres's footage, is a statement from the manager of the Harrington Grand, accompanied by preserved security footage. In April of this year, 3 weeks before the subject of the lawsuit applied for a housekeeping position at that hotel, Rebecca Calloway visited the property and made specific inquiries about that individual by name, including questions about the hotel's hiring process for staff with pending civil litigation. Patricia Ashe looked at the footage still frame. She looked at Rebecca. "This was 3 weeks before she was employed there," Patricia said. "Yes," James said. A fourth document, Sandra Chu's statement from Fenwick Group. A fifth, Gerald's signed statement. James read key passages from Gerald's statement aloud. The room was quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when people are deciding what they already knew. And finally, James said, he played the audio on his laptop through the room's speakers. Rebecca's voice, clean and precise, filled the boardroom. Things can be structured differently, depending on what the circumstances require. The recording ran for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. No one spoke. When it ended, James closed the laptop. He said this conversation occurred yesterday morning. The subject of the lawsuit was approached, directly offered a personal settlement with confidentiality terms, and explicitly threatened with the construction of a second set of allegations, if she declined. The board member to Patricia's left, a man named Lawrence Chen, who rarely spoke in board meetings, but whose silence always meant something, said, "Is there counsel here for Rebecca?" "I chose to attend without counsel," Rebecca said. Her voice was steady. It had been steady throughout. "That was your choice," Lawrence said. Rebecca looked at Ethan. For a moment she looked at him the way she'd always looked at him when he was doing something she hadn't anticipated. Not quite surprised, but registering the distance between what she'd expected and what was actually happening. "The document timestamps," she said. James said file creation dates can be not in Calloway's closed repository, the outside general counsel said. It was the first thing she'd said. The internal system uses server-side timestamps with cryptographic verification. They can't be retroactively altered without leaving a record. The access log shows no such alteration attempt. Rebecca turned to the general counsel. The composure was holding, but it was holding in the way something holds when most of the structural support has been removed by will not by foundation. "I was protecting this company," she said. "The person in question had proximate access." "She didn't," Ethan said. Rebecca looked at him. "There is no proximate access," Ethan said. "No professional relationship, no technical overlap between Fenwick Group's business and Calloway's product infrastructure. The filing was made using a document your device created in our system through a firm you personally retained without authorization from anyone in this room." He paused. "That is fraud. It is also tortious interference. And yesterday morning it became criminal intimidation." The room was quiet again. Patricia Ashe said, "I move that we vote on the immediate suspension of all advisory access associated with Gerald Calloway's account, pending a formal independent audit of all actions taken under that access in the past 18 months. "Seconded," Lawrence Chen said. The vote was taken. 5 in favor, 1 abstention. Gerald recused himself from the wall chair. The motion passed. James placed a final document in front of Rebecca, not at the board's request, but as a formal notice. "This is the commencement of a civil action filed this morning by Claire Weston against Rebecca Calloway, personally, for fraud, tortious interference, defamation, and criminal intimidation. You'll want to retain personal counsel." Rebecca looked at the document. She did not pick it up. She stood. She buttoned her jacket. She looked at Ethan once more, a long, specific look, the kind that has things in it that have nowhere to go now. And she walked out of the boardroom without speaking. The outside general counsel made a note. Patricia Ashe let out a slow breath. Lawrence Chen looked at the documents on the table. Ethan sat for a moment after the room began to clear. James came and sat beside him. "The firm is withdrawing the civil suit," James said. "They called when the board meeting started. They had someone watching the building." He paused. They knew. They knew, Ethan said. He looked at the empty chair at the far end of the table. "What does Gerald need? Time, probably," James said. "And a separate attorney. Someone not connected to this. Find him someone. I already have a name." James looked at Ethan. "You did the right thing bringing it here. To the proper place. That matters. What matters is that it's over," Ethan said. "For Claire," James said. "For Claire." Ethan stood. He picked up his phone and called her. It rang once. "It's over," he said. A long silence on the line. Then all of it, the suit is withdrawn. The motion passed. She's been formally notified of the personal action. Another silence. "Ethan." "Yes." "Come home," she said. He looked out the window at the city and the lake beyond it. 10 minutes, he said. 3 weeks passed. Not cleanly, nothing since Ethan's return had been clean, but in the way that time moves when the worst of something is over, and the rest of it is paperwork. James managed the legal threads. Rebecca retained outside counsel and went quiet. The independent audit of Gerald's advisory account was completed in 10 days and yielded nothing further beyond what they already knew. Sandra Chu issued a formal statement from Fenwick Group on the 14th day, clearing Claire Weston of all allegations and acknowledging that the termination had been initiated by external misrepresentation. Marcus Webb's story published on the 15th, not the story he'd been hired to write, but the one he'd found underneath it, a careful account of how a fabricated evidence trail had been constructed using a company's internal infrastructure against a private individual with no names left unidentified. Claire read it at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug. She read it twice. Then she set it face down and did not look at it again. On the 17th day, she had a call with the managing director of Meridian Strategies, a firm she'd known tangentially for 4 years. They had seen the Fenwick statement and the Webb piece, and they wanted to talk. The call lasted 40 minutes. They offered her a position, not the position she'd had at Fenwick, a better one. She said she'd think about it. She told Ethan that night. He said, "What did you tell them that I'd think about it?" she said. And I'm thinking about it," she said. He understood. She was moving at the pace she chose. He did not push. Rebecca settled the personal suit on day 21. The terms were not public, but James told Ethan the figure and the conditions, a sum that represented meaningful consequences and a permanent injunction preventing any future involvement in Callaway Ventures in any capacity. Gerald signed the separation agreement with Rebecca the same week. He moved into a smaller property he'd kept, a townhouse in Evanston he'd held for tax purposes for 15 years and never inhabited, and he did not make it into an event. He simply moved. Ethan went to see him once on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced, the way he'd gone to Kenilworth, but differently this time. Gerald answered the door in a sweater without the suit, and for the first time in Ethan's memory, he looked like someone who had recently put something down, rather than someone performing the act of carrying it. They drank coffee at a small table in an unfurnished room, and they talked about the company, about Singapore, about a fishing trip Gerald had been planning to take before all of this happened. They did not talk about Rebecca. They did not talk about the board meeting. Neither of them was ready yet for the conversation about the years between, and both of them knew it, and so they talked around it carefully in the way that people do when they're trying to find the language for something that hasn't been named yet. When Ethan left, Gerald stood at the door and said, "Bring Claire sometime, when it's right." Ethan said, I will. He drove back to the Gold Coast and went upstairs and found Claire in the spare room, which she'd been reorganizing. The boxes from River North were stacked along the wall, not stored, not abandoned, being gone through. She had an open box in front of her, and she was sorting, keeping some things, setting others aside. She looked up when he came in. How was he? She said. Different, Ethan said. Better, I think. She nodded. She looked at the box. I accepted the meridian position, she said. He came in and leaned against the doorframe. When? An hour ago. I called them. She put a folder in the keep pile. It's a good fit. I know the sector, I know some of the clients. It won't feel like starting over. She paused. It'll feel like starting again, which is different. Good, he said. It's the right call. She looked at him. You haven't asked me what I want to do about the rest. The rest, he said, is whenever you want. There's no timeline I'm working against. There is actually, she said. She set the folder down and turned to look at him properly. The suite at the Harrington Grand. You still have the reservation. He looked at her. I've been extending it every week, he said, since the night I came home. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, tomorrow night. They arrived at the Harrington Grand at 7 on a Tuesday. Claire was wearing a dress she'd kept in a garment bag at the back of a River North storage box for the better part of a year. A deep blue thing she'd bought for a dinner they'd never gotten to, because his flight from Austin had been delayed. She'd worn it once to try it on. It had been in the box ever since. The lobby of the Harrington moved around them, the way lobbies do at 7 on a weekday evening. Checkout energy, the piano in the bar. A conference group dispersing near the elevators. Vanessa Torres was not at the front desk, but she was crossing the lobby when they came in. She stopped. She looked at Claire in the dress at the proper entrance of the hotel, and something in her expression settled into something Ethan didn't have a word for. Ms. Weston, she said. Vanessa Claire said. This is Ethan. I know who he is, Vanessa said. She shook Ethan's hand with the same directness she'd had in her office the week before. Congratulations on all of it. Thank you, Ethan said, for what you kept. Someone should have, Vanessa said simply. She moved on. They went to the elevator. On 23, the hallway was quiet. The door to the suite was the same door it had always been. Ethan put in the keycard. The room was the same room, the corner view, the lake in the dark. The table he'd had set again, because some things were worth repeating. They sat down. The food was there, and the wine was there, and the city light was moving on the water the way it did in October when the sky was clear. They did not talk about the lawsuit. They did not talk about Rebecca. They talked about Singapore, a night market he'd gone to alone, and wanted to bring her to a building he'd seen from a ferry crossing that had made him think about architecture in a way he hadn't since college. She told him about a book she'd read at 2 in the morning in the Humboldt Park studio when she couldn't sleep, and how she'd thought about him on a particular page, and then put it face down. Because she didn't have room for that feeling right then. Which page, he said. She told him. He said he'd read the book. After dinner, she stood at the window. He stood beside her, not quite touching, and they looked at the lake. She said, she wanted you to see me as diminished. He said, I know. Did you for a second, when you saw me in the lobby? He thought about it honestly. I saw you differently than I expected to see you, he said. And then you said you weren't supposed to be here yet, and I knew, I don't know how exactly, but I knew it wasn't the whole story. And the version that it wasn't diminished was right there underneath the one I was looking at. He paused. It took about 30 seconds. She was quiet. 30 seconds, she said. Maybe 25, he said. She laughed. It was the first full laugh he'd heard from her in the 3 weeks since his return, and real unguarded, the kind that comes out before you've decided whether to let it. It settled something in the room. She turned from the window. Behind her, through the door he'd left ajar, the hallway was visible. And in the hallway, partly lit by the corridor light, was a cleaning cart from the previous shift. The silver frame and the stacked linens and the small supply caddy that she had pushed through these corridors 4 days a week for 4 months. She looked at it. He watched her. She looked at it for a long moment, at the things she'd pushed and the floors she'd covered, and the 4 months she'd spent in rooms that weren't hers, working toward a future she refused to give up on. Then she turned back to him. The lake was behind her, and the light from the city was in the room, and she reached out and pulled the door closed. "Thank you for waiting," she said. "For the reservation." He said, "I knew you'd come." She looked at him for a moment, the way she looked when she was deciding whether something was true, and deciding it was. "Yes," she said. "You did." Whatever you thought about Ethan and Claire in this story, about what it costs to stay quiet, and what it means to fight through it alone, let us know in the comments. We'll see you in the next one.